everybody. It's Monday, July 26th, and that means it's time for another episode of Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia Nonprofit Conversations. I'm one of your hosts, Cecilia Sepp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips Nonprofit Consulting and Association Management Services. My usual co-host, Agnes Amos Coleman, who's one of our senior consultants, cannot be with us today due to a schedule conflict. So on behalf of Agnes, I would like to say hello to our global community and audience and say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you might be at the moment. Today, we're very excited to continue our conversation we started last week about how do you deal with a predecessor in a new position when you join a new organization, or maybe you move into a different department at your organization. So we're really excited today to have as our guest Victoria Elliott, who's currently the Chief Executive Officer at the Pennsylvania Pharmacists Association, and she's had the opportunity to serve as a Chief Staff Executive at 8 different organizations. So welcome, Victoria. Would you like to say hello and tell us something about yourself?
Well, hello, Cecilia. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Really appreciate to be with you and Rogue Tulips. I am Victoria Elliott. I am a pharmacist who has had now the opportunity to work with a pharmacy community and the Pennsylvania Pharmacists Association. I started that position officially January 1, but prior to that, spent about 5 to 6 weeks in a transition with the previous Chief Executive Officer. So providing a unique opportunity to kind of get a handle on how things were being run there in their building that they own in our state capital, Harrisburg, get to meet the staff, get comfortable with processes and procedures, and take away as much knowledge as I could in those 6 weeks while she wrapped up her term and her 18-year tenure with the association. As Cecilia noted, I've had the opportunity to serve in this role for a number of nonprofit organizations, mostly in the healthcare space, all with physician, nursing, or pharmacy groups. But it's really my pleasure to be back with my roots and be working with colleagues in the pharmacy profession.
Well, that's great. And it's really interesting to hear that you've done most of this work within the healthcare community. That's an area that I've also worked in quite frequently. So I definitely perked my ears up when I heard that. So when we were talking last week, Agnes and I talked about, well, how do you handle it when you come in behind someone, because most positions are not new positions. So you're usually coming behind somebody who's had the job for a while. Maybe they've left the organization, and sometimes they leave under good circumstances, sometimes not so good circumstances. And that's kind of what we touched on. So I'd like to start where you are now and maybe go backwards. Your current situation sounds actually like a really good way to do it. So you came in behind a long-time CSE, but you were able to spend time with that person and get to know them and really have a very smooth transition. So what were some of the questions you asked or some of the things that you did with your predecessor?
So this is actually the second opportunity like this, but both different in that I did spend some time with the outgoing CSE. In the situation prior, that CSE had already resigned. They went through a search process, and I came in without, that opportunity, was heavily reliant on staff. But in this particular situation, it was a lot of listening, attending every meeting that she was sitting in to really just kind of gather information, kind of take away from that my questions, try and work with her to clarify sort of, what I was hearing, where does this particular committee or event or issue or project fit into the big picture. Keep in mind that they were also in a limited in-office situation. We were still dealing with the pandemic. Their staff was only in 2 days a week. So I was doing some of this transition remotely with her, actually a lot of it, and some of it in person. So again, I was pretty fortunate in that I did have those in-office opportunities to get a handle on the dynamics, just understand the setting, just the logistics, getting in and out of the building, just little things like that you don't think about, but you just have to be conscious of in a situation where the organization is sort of wholly owned and you're not working for another company. And so some of my questions really, centered around history, knowledge of current leaders, prospective leaders. In this organization, it's rather complex for a state organization. They have 4 separate entities that the CSE has to oversee. So understanding the nuances of that, how they all work together, oversight of 4 different financial statements, as you can imagine, that's quite a bit of work. And then add another layer of complexity in that there's quite a bit of funding that's secured through a CDC grant. We work with the Department of Health here in Pennsylvania for that grant that supports several projects within the organization that this CSE actually had the opportunity to launch. So trying to make sure that I can provide an appropriate segue, maintain and secure that funding moving forward. And just all the ins and outs of that frankly, I'm still learning.
Mhm.
I'm fortunate in that she's made herself accessible where that part of the business is concerned. And so I lean on her for some information pretty regularly right now until I get more of that experience under my belt.
This sounds like a really great and much smoother way to transition than I think some chief staff executives get. You mentioned that had happened before you had an opportunity to do that. So were there any differences in those 2 transition periods?
Sure. I think the biggest difference is that when you do not have the opportunity to work with the CSE, you're heavily reliant on your volunteers and the existing staff.
Okay.
And so quickly you've got to be able to build those relationships. In the prior situation, I had no relationships with the volunteers or the staff. However, I was very fortunate in that our presidential leadership was very accessible. The president at the time and I were lockstep in how we were moving forward. And this was really, I was brought in as a change agent and we went through significant change. And he was very comfortable taking that lead, setting a new direction for the organization. And so we understood pretty early what we were looking to accomplish. On the staff side, again, rather fortunate in that 2 out of the 3 staff remained with the organization during my tenure. Up until the very end, we made a change to a management company and there were some changes then. But, like anything, you come in, you assess the staff, you see who's a fit. I'm a big believer in the right butt, right seat at the right time.
Right.
And so we did have to make one adjustment there, which I think was very positive for the organization. But there was also an opportunity to impart on some of these existing staff new roles and responsibilities. And they really relished them because they were sort of kept out of a lot of the day-to-day and some of the strategic decisions. And so we're really in a reactionary position. And my goal always is, I don't have time to do all those kinds of things. I don't expect to do all those kinds of things. And my board doesn't expect me to do all those things. That's why you have staff. Right. And so it was a real learning opportunity for a couple of them. They welcomed that. It was a growth phase for a couple of them professionally. And so for me, that's some of the most rewarding parts of the position. In this situation where I am now, I'm a little bit different in that the dynamic was such that their boss was still in the picture. And so, my goal was to not sort of step on those toes, kind of observe the relationship, try and glean from my predecessor where she thought their strengths and weaknesses were. So I had that opportunity, have those discussions, kind of get a feel for the situation before I was on my own with them. And then also providing myself time to make my own assessment of what strengths and weaknesses were to see whether or not we did have the right butt and the right seat at the right time. I will say at this point in time, I've retained all the staff that were there. Similarly to the last position, really looked at where they had strengths and weaknesses, imparted new responsibilities, new ownership, and the feedback has been consistently, we're really enjoying the opportunities we're getting. Now, the staff still feels very overworked. That has not changed for them, unfortunately, but that is not really a unique thing in a small staff situation. Right. But we've got a lot of synergy. They feel acknowledged, and take on things, come up with new ideas, and seem to work well as a group when I'm not in the picture as well. So pretty comfortable with that staffing situation. But again, the opportunity to kind of see the dynamics before, find some opportunities for how to maybe approach that differently, and see if I can get these individuals into a situation where we are working as a well-oiled machine so that we can all focus on our priorities and keep the organizational the organizational priorities really top of mind.
Oh, that's well, and I really love the way you explain that about the staff, getting to know them, getting some input from your predecessor of, where they're good, where they need some help, maybe some more training. That's really a great opportunity. But I think many of us, when we go into a chief staff executive position, we don't have necessarily that opportunity for a variety of reasons, because maybe the person moved on to a new organization, or maybe they left in not the best of circumstances. So what's some advice you might have about coming in? You're coming in behind someone who's not there, you don't have access to, maybe you see their memos or their old emails or things like that, but you have to base everything on what people tell you.
Right.
So what is some advice you might have for someone coming in who's hearing a lot of different things from a lot of different people about the predecessor, but what you want to do is just get information to move forward?
That's a really good question. In the prior situation, and even now, there's certain people have certain impressions of their CSE. In the last situation, it was sort of a mixed. There were some that were very loyal, very sad when she left. And this had been a pretty long tenure, about as not quite as long as this one, but still significantly long, and probably one of the first full-time paid CSEs for that organization. So there was some navigation there, but I will tell you the leadership at the time that I had the opportunity to work with, really their loyalty was to advancement of the organization, and felt strongly that they had come. The opportunity was now, with this person exiting the position, to take a different direction. So that was made very clear to me in the interview process, that we're not moving forward as we did prior, that we've got some new ideas. We're in a contract that we don't think is fair to us. So know that coming in. And I walked into my interview with some, based on what I knew of the organization, some new ideas for them to consider, which really did, when we brought them to the board, brought them to the management company, ruffled a few feathers. So it was apparent that this was not going to be business as usual. But it was my understanding coming in that was the case. And so I took my charge. This is what I was hired to do. I can appreciate history, and certainly I'm very sensitive to that. We were running up to their 30th anniversary, and that's a huge celebration for any nonprofit organization that can survive that long through several CSE transitions. But that this organization also, in a very competitive space, which in that case was wound care, needed to start standing out if it was going to make a difference and grow its membership. So my leadership made that rather easy. And as I said, I think the staff were looking for some change in the way things had been previously managed. In this situation, this was a predecessor who had taken the organization actually from really a budget crisis situation, and had to turn it around. So she was in a similar situation, a big turnaround, having to find new sources of revenue, having to rebuild relationships with members, other stakeholders in the pharmacy community, and over time did that. The other thing she did was establish a really strong student base, which for a lot of nonprofits, as you know, Cecilia, is really a struggle, particularly if your industry isn't sort of an immediate stepping stone for college students. In our case, it is. It could be. And we are, I'm going to use the word fortunate, but it can be a challenge, to have 7 schools of pharmacy based in Pennsylvania. So that is that's a huge opportunity for organizations to really look at how we can forge relationships with those schools to foster student engagement as an undergraduate, look for opportunities and segue into leadership positions as graduates, and kind of bridge the gap between college and the professional life. And she did that quite successfully. We have a very large student advisory board, and continually students, compete for those positions, step up to the plate, and find leadership opportunities in organizations. That was a big program I needed to make sure I sustained. And I find it to be a challenge because we have so many schools. That I needed to really kind of be able to focus on that among a few other programs that she was responsible for, and that clearly are lending themselves to success for this organization.
And that is a fantastic example of being able to build on something your predecessor had started and keep that growing. And believe it or not, we are already at the end of our episode. So
Oh my goodness.
I'd like to ask our guests, I mean, first of all, Victoria, thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective from the CSE
You're welcome.
position, because that's really very unique view of any nonprofit organization, no matter what type of nonprofit it is. It's a very different role. It's a very different viewpoint. We'd like to ask our guest at the end of the episode, what is the one thought you would like people to take away on this topic? So what's the one thought you'd like people to take away about if you're a CSE coming in and you've had a predecessor, you're not at a startup. So what's some thought to take away on that? And then if people want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Great. So I think one thought is respect. Having respect for the predecessor, particularly in a situation where you have the opportunity to have some overlap and transition and some, learning time with them. In this case, the individual, announced her retirement quite early, gave the organization plenty of, run time to go through a process to find a new chief staff executive. But she really expended a lot of energy, thought, and a lot of her life into the organization, and it was evident. And so, it was a little bittersweet for her. So, giving her room to kind of, go through that process. There was a particular scenario in which I was trying to help her wrap up some things. She was running up against, a timeline now to get some business done for me, business done for the organization, set some things aside, clean out her files, etc. And I attempted to take on something to assist her. And it wasn't the right thing to take on. And I didn't have an appreciation for that. And we spoke about it, and, we got past that. It was great. But, in hindsight, I was like, you know what? She just needed a little more time to wrap up the things that she felt very, very, she'd had a lot of ownership of. And these had to do with some pretty critical relationships with legislators in the Commonwealth. And so that was a real learning opportunity for me to, realize that it's not my time quite yet. And, just, bide your time until the individuals, officially exited. And then that's when you kind of step in and start putting your own sort of stamp, if you will, on things. So that's my takeaway. A lot of respect for the position, regardless of the circumstances under which they left, because at some point, that was a job they took on, and they attempted to do it as best as they could.
Right.
As far as contacting me, my email is VELLIOTT@PAPharmacist.com. So VElliott@PAPharmacist.com. I welcome an email, and you can find me on LinkedIn at Victoria Elliott.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Victoria, because again, the CSE view is very different from the rest of the organization. So we so appreciate you taking the time to share your experience and your wisdom with our audience today. And we hope to have you back in the future to continue this kind of discussion on what it's like to be a CSE. So that'd be great. Thank you. So we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next week with another episode of Nonprofit Conversations. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips, check us out online, roguetulips.com. And we encourage you to check out our sister company, the 501c League, especially if you're interested in learning more about the CAE designation and getting education and training to prep for the exam or maintain your renewal. You can learn more about the League at the 501cleague.net. Until then, we'll see you next time.